It is the most versatile aircraft in the Navy and Marine Corps arsenal. Combining the speed and agility of a fighter with the power of a light bomber, the FA-18 is a lethal weapon, a marvel of modern aircraft design. It's every pilot's dream to fly one, but to reach these elite ranks, trainees must pass a series of rigorous tests. From the training field to the carrier deck, the FA-18 has seized center stage as the world's elite strike fighter, the backbone of carrier-based aviation.
Thanks for 3-1, Josh. Approach Charlie, down 2-3, Call 3-1, go.
Every day in the skies over hostile territory, squadrons of FA-18s are on the prowl. This is the front line where the FA-18 excels. Striking targets in support of troops on the ground and tracking the horizon for enemy fighters, these jets project power from thousands of feet in the air. And their reach extends to almost anywhere on the planet, because their home base is no ordinary airstrip. For the FA-18, home base is a floating runway churning the waters miles offshore. This is one of the United States' 12 aircraft carriers, a fully functional airport at sea. Even after striking targets and risking the threat of enemy fire, these FA-18 pilots can't rest until they bring their aircraft safely to a stop on board. A carrier air wing is made up of more than just fighter jets. Each of the 80-plus planes on board carries out a specific task. S-3 Vikings for refueling and sub-hunting. E-2C Hawkeyes for reconnaissance. EA-6B Prowlers for jamming enemy electronics. And HH-60 Seahawk helicopters for shuttling people and materials. All these aircraft and the carrier itself are focused on one objective: forward force projection. And the one plane best suited for that role is the FA-18. The FA-18 Hornet is a $38 million high-tech machine. It's the smallest plane on the carrier, just 56 feet long and 15 feet tall with a 40-foot wingspan. Its streamlined design is characterized by a long, narrow fuselage and side-by-side powerful twin engines. At 21,000 pounds, it weighs half as much as many other fighter jets, with an advanced composite airframe of aluminum, titanium, and steel. To fly one of these jets is to join the ranks of just over 1,000 active Navy and Marine Corps Hornet aviators. The journey to become a carrier-qualified FA-18 pilot begins thousands of miles away from hostile territory in the peaceful farmland of Central California. Naval Air Station Lemoore is the Navy's newest and largest master jet air station. The flat terrain and lack of neighbors makes Lemoore a perfect spot. Here, aviators who have passed their basic flight training learn how to fly the FA-18. It's a mentally and physically challenging program. The newest class of trainees will undergo 300 hours of classwork and at least 300 hours more in simulators and training aircraft before they can even step into the cockpit of an FA-18 jet. Lemoore's Flying Eagles of VFA 122 are among the best in the Navy when it comes to training elite aviators, preparing them for battle.
A fleet replacement squadron trains the frontline pilots. That's what we do. The folks that we get into VFA 122 have never flown anything tactical, but when they leave here, they go right to a frontline fleet squadron.
To forge elite pilots out of raw aviators, trainers here push their students harder than most other squadrons.
We have roughly 100 students of some type in training at any one time here. We're flying probably more than we expected to, certainly more than anybody else expected us to the tune of 18,000 hours last year alone, where another squadron with a similar mission like this one typically would fly 12 to 13, maybe 15,000 flight hours. To put that in perspective, a fleet squadron on a very good year might fly 5,000 hours.
Since the delivery of the first FA-18s in 1980, Lemoore has been known as the home of the Hornet. Nearly 365 days a year, from the early morning on, the skies over Lemoore echo with the deafening roar of FA-18 jet fighters. The FA-18 that these trainees hope to fly is a much more sophisticated machine than earlier Navy jets. During the 1960s and 70s, the Navy was launching two formidable workhorses from its aircraft carriers. The F-4 Phantom was a reliable, fast, powerful fighter designed for air-to-air combat. Capable of reaching speeds of almost 1,500 miles per hour, it could carry a deadly array of weapons. The A-7 Corsair was a slower armored jet, a lethal light bomber that could deliver a 15,000-pound payload. Combined, the two planes flew hundreds of thousands of combat sorties in military operations all over the world. But by the mid-1970s, the F-4 and A-7 were aging and nearing the end of their useful lives. The Navy needed newer, higher-tech aircraft able to handle the demands of modern warfare. The Navy conceived of the FA-18 in order to replace both the F-4 and A-7 in one combined strike fighter design and thereby free valuable space on its aircraft carriers. As a result, the FA-18 is the first jet designated both F for fighter and A for attack. The deployment of a multi-role strike fighter had been a long-time goal for the Navy, and the FA-18 has fulfilled that goal and more. While past planes like the F-4 could be configured as either a bomber or a fighter for a single mission, the FA-18 can fill both roles simultaneously.
The beauty of the F-18 is that you can carry a number of weapons across the wing, 6, 7, 8 weapons that can all be independently targeted on separate aim points in a target area. In the past, you may have needed, a whole strike from a carrier to be able to do that. Now you just do it with one airplane.
The FA-18's multi-role capability has made it the mainstay of the carrier air wing. And like all Navy planes, it still has to meet the tough requirements of fleet aviation. On the deck of an aircraft carrier, FA-18s undergo constant structural stress caused by the violence of landing. But they're built to take it.
I think what you'll notice, versus an Air Force aircraft, is just look at how beefy the landing gear are on any Navy airplane. And that's just to withstand the shock of coming down at about a descent rate of 750 foot per minute rate of descent, flying that 3 degree or 3.5 degree glide slope. The landing gear is built to withstand that shock.
With 15 years of FA-18 experience, Dan Dino Martin knows full well the challenges of fleet aviation. He's successfully touched down on carriers over 400 times. Landing an FA-18 is the equivalent to bringing a loaded semi-trailer from 150 miles per hour to a full stop in less than 3 seconds. The FA-18 is also built to sustain a punishing takeoff.
Another thing you'll notice about the aircraft, the nose gear is going to be real beefy, but what's this ugly looking thing right here hanging off the front of the nose gear? That's our launch bar, and that is going to be hydraulically extended and retracted. It goes down into that shuttle, it goes down a cat track, and that shuttle grabs onto the tip of that launch bar, and that's what propels you down the catapult stroke.
Powerful engines, General Electric's F404s, are each capable of generating 18,000 pounds of thrust, an astounding 1/4 of the thrust of the rocket that sent the Mercury spacecraft into orbit. The FA-18's twin engines have built-in redundancy, so that if one engine goes down, the other can power the plane. Despite all the extra weight needed to land, launch, and keep the FA-18 aloft, its power and small size make it the most maneuverable aircraft in the Navy's airborne arsenal. Racing at top speeds of Mach 1.8, the Hornet can also climb at a rate of over 45,000 feet per minute. Leading-edge wing extensions and outward canted tail fins stabilize airflow, while the wide range of motion in the ailerons, flaps, and tail planes give the Hornet unparalleled pitch and roll control. The FA-18 is so maneuverable, it's the jet of choice for the Navy's Blue Angels demonstration squadron. These daring pilots have been flying the FA-18 Hornet since 1986. The jet's speed and handling characteristics have allowed the team to add new maneuvers to their program. The FA-18 can turn on a very tight radius and perform rapid rolls, all while also displaying the best slow speed ability of any Navy jet. But the Hornet's maneuverability takes a physical toll on the pilot. Its high-speed turns can create over 7.5 Gs. Under this stress, the average pilot feels almost 1,500 pounds of downward pressure on his body. To prepare for the rigors of flying an FA-18, pilots at Lemoore Naval Air Station undergo intense training. One of the most grueling stages takes place in the centrifuge. Lieutenant Tori Campbell is the Director of Navy and Marine Corps Centrifuge Training. All new FA-18 pilots must make it through her program before being cleared to take off in the jet.
So what we have today is a very typical class for Centrifuge-Based Flight Environment Training, or CFET. We have 10 students. They are new FA-18 pilots. They are winged. They are already pilots, but they are just beginning to learn how to fly the FA-18. We're bringing them through this training. They get it at the very beginning of their training to teach them how to deal with the effects of the Gs, because the FA-18 is by far the most capable aircraft that these young pilots have ever flown in.
The goal is to teach the trainee how to handle the high Gs while pursuing an enemy or bandit. The centrifuge contains an exact replica of the pilot's controls.
During this training, the pilot is actually controlling the device from inside of it. It's a 90-second profile. It's extremely challenging, as the pilot has to go ahead, track the bandit, and at the same time perfect this technique to enable him to go as high as 7.5 Gs.
Failing to master the anti-G maneuvers can be disastrous.
If at the point that the pilot begins to experience gray out and he does not correct the situation by improving his anti-G straining maneuver, this can progress to G-lock, which is gravity-induced loss of consciousness. During a G-lock event, the pilot is completely unconscious. Typically it's about 12 seconds, but it can be as long as 45 seconds. Probably even more dangerous than the G-lock is the A-lock, or the almost loss of consciousness. After an A-lock, the pilot, although having never lost consciousness, is completely confused, disoriented, and has no sense of spatial awareness. The lights are on, but nobody's home, and this is extraordinarily dangerous.
The high Gs pulled by the FA-18 make time spent in the gondola critical.
This is an extremely important part of their training. A lot of the training, the survival training that pilots get, is only if something goes horribly, horribly wrong. But for an FA-18 pilot, the skills and techniques that they're going to learn here today are things that they will use every single time they fly their aircraft.
Go ahead and step up here, sir.
To counter high Gs, pilots flex their core muscles and exhale sharply in what's called a hic maneuver for the sound the pilot makes.
Comfortable, sir?
They also wear specially engineered G-suits.
What the G-suit does is when you're pulling G's, basically it's pushing all the blood to the lower parts of your bodies, the lower extremities such as your thighs, your calves, and your abdomen, and it brings the oxygenated blood away from your brain. So what this does is create pressure around the biggest muscles, and also incorporated with the Hick maneuver, the squeezing of your lower extremities, your biggest muscles being the thighs and abdomen. It pushes all that blood back up and keeps you from passing out.
I'm just gonna have you sit here.